Hello and welcome to the EPRI Current. I'm your host, or one of them for today, Samantha Gilman, and I am joined by my fellow host, Bill Florence, a fellow guest host, Dan Moneghan, and our guest, Wynter McGruder. We're going to be talking about GFNI, which wrapped up last month in Miami, and I'm excited to get started. Bill, are you excited to get started?
I'm always excited. But particularly today, Dan and Wynter, thanks so much for joining us today. So Dan, let's get right to it. What was it like hosting this special podcast series?
It was great. I've wanted to do something like that for quite a while, and it was great to have the opportunity to finally get to take a stab at being a podcast host. It's not easy. I have a lot of respect for what you two do as a result of having to try and do it myself. Managing my words, managing my guests, managing the topic. Not so great on managing the time, but we're not perfect. The people I got to meet were incredible. There were so many different perspectives that I got to encounter that I would never have gotten to without the opportunity. So meeting people who approach similar problems and similar cultural challenges with very different perspectives and different tactics that we can really easily adopt and bring into EPRI, into the nuclear sector, into our own businesses. I think there's a whole lot that people can take away from those episodes, because I know I have. So I really hope that you all get to listen to them, watch them, however it is you consume podcasts, and let us know how you've benefited from hearing all of the ways that the guests from the special series turned their own ambitions into actions.
Podcast hosting is not just a job, it's an adventure all the time. And just to follow up with that real quickly, Dan, can you recall some of the maybe major highlights?
And also some of the guests that joined, tease that to our current listeners, and they can go back and listen on their own.
That's true. We had people who worked across education, who were defining new ways of conveying information to students, new pathways that you can gain information from, both in learning fundamental skills and in learning industry-specific techniques. I think one of the quotes from our workforce development episode that stuck out to me was, hire for personality and train for skills, or something to that effect. You want to make sure you find the right people who care, people who are motivated, and you can teach someone who's interested anything you want, but it takes a lot of effort to find the right personality for a task or for a role. And the skills, well, we're humans, we're really great at learning stuff. When we talked about applications for nuclear beyond electricity, we heard from people around the world about ways they were conceiving of new reactors to fulfill these different purposes, redesigning things from the ground up with a completely different application in mind. And I thought that was pretty fascinating, because I'm interested in these reactor designs myself as a matter of background and my day job. So that was particularly interesting. The third podcast we had talked about the ways you can improve efficiency, how you can operate a lean machine. And when I had first thought about this, it was all about technology. But when I started talking to people who actually work both in industry and who work on, leading small teams of boat racing, the realization that efficiency is not so much about the tools you have access to, but about the way you take advantage of people's knowledge and skills to apply any tools you have access to, was a really interesting perspective change for me that I hadn't considered.
Dan, if I could interrupt, is boat racing, it's a technical term, or are you talking about like real boats?
Real boats, real races. Well, real boats, real race.
Cool.
For the purposes of our guest in that show. But yeah, taking advantage of ways that you can make any set of tools work for you is a way to really improve your efficiency. Not just what's the coolest new technology out there. Let me grab a spot robot and use that to do something. It's awesome if you can, and you should. But finding ways to benefit from the people you already have is most important.
Now, I'm definitely intrigued about this episode on how boat racing is related to nuclear innovation, and I bet our listeners are too. Now, Dan, I interrupted you. You had one more. Please go.
I was just going to keep talking for hours. We can move on to another question if you want.
Well, let's talk to Wynter for a moment. So, Wynter, you are part of the nuclear team here at EPRI, and you also got to MC the Global Forum down in Miami last month. Talk to us a little bit about what that was like and some of the highlights from the show for you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for letting me jump on to the podcast. I am a listener, so this is surreal for me to be able to be on it. Yes, I had the distinct pleasure and honor of emceeing the GFNI, and I had an absolute blast. I mean, it was in Miami, one of the most beautiful places ever. It was sunny, it was gorgeous. And we had people from all over the world coming out to basically experience different ways to innovate. So we are really focused on trying to turn innovation into something that's integrated into our everyday activities, into the way we do work. And at GFNI, we really started using different tools to be able to do that. So some of my favorite highlights, I have to say, were the ambition wall. We essentially had to write a specific goal that each of us had, whether it was personal or professional, onto an index card and put it on a wall. And then someone at that conference knew how to help make that ambition into action. And so people would take the ambition off the wall and they'd reach out to you. So I've already had people reaching out to me about both my professional and personal ambition, where my personal one was to learn to hem pants because I'm a very short person and I need help with hemming my pants. And my professional one was to work on a fusion project. And I've already gotten people reaching out. I've reached out to people about their ambitions. It was absolutely one of my favorite things because it allowed us to take the tools that we developed at the GFNI with us outside of the conference. So the conference is technically done, but the spirit of it is still alive and well.
I love that idea. I mean, I just love that idea.
And the work is never done. And so one of the things I've read about how the event was is one of the goals was to provide tools or framework for the participants of the event to go back to their own organizations and accelerate innovation and this idea of ambition. And so getting to the framework that came out of this, could Dan or Wynter, can you tell us a bit about the framework and the steps involved?
Sure. So it's the ambition into action framework. And the beauty of this framework is it is as simple and as complicated or complex as you need it to be for the specific thing that you are trying to innovate around. So it essentially evolves around three basic steps. The first one is to define your ambition or your outcome. And a lot of times when we are trying to innovate, the instinct is to start with the problem, which sometimes can be a bit daunting. But instead, with this framework, you're starting visualizing the solution. You're thinking about what's my ambition? What's the goal? What does the world look like if this thing that I want to happen happens? So you're actually starting from a point of what's the world going to look like if I'm successful? So it gets you excited. It gets you really thinking about it. Then the next step is to identify the actions. What are the specific steps that need to be taken so that you can actually make this outcome or make this world real? And you walk through just like you would with a plan and think about, what do I need to do? Who do I need to collaborate with? What sort of resources do I need to make this a reality? And then the final step is to balance what we defined as enablers and barriers. And this is really thinking about the different attributes that go into planning a solution, things like resources and innovation and organizational leadership, all of these things that are necessary to execute these actions. How can these things end up being barriers to the success of the outcome? And then how can these things be enablers to the success? How can they actually feed the success of doing those actions? So that's a broad overview of the framework.
That's great. Thanks, Wynter. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I got to apply it while Wynter was busy emceeing the event and hyping us all up and getting the DJ to play music. I was in one of the small groups who was somewhat frantically trying to work through a lot of little discrete steps to apply the framework towards a particular problem related to one of the grand challenges. And to Wynter's point, it really can be as simple or as complex as you want to make it. It's a tool that doesn't tell you what to do. It says, here are things you could do. Walk through it at your own pace, at your own level of detail. So I had a lot of fun working with my group on our particular micro challenge. We were working on how you can apply a large language model solution towards license renewals or the review of license renewal applications at the regulator. A semi-repetitive task, given that 20 or 30 of the same effective license renewal documents get submitted for the same plants over and over again. So why can't we query a large database of all of this information with a language model? In putting together within the framework, putting together a plan that identifies who owns what, which different kinds of organizational challenges can become enablers if we tune them to the right level. All of that was a really interesting way to approach a problem that I hadn't considered before. And I want to emphasize that I really like what Wynter said about how you start with the world as you have succeeded in mind when you're defining your ambition into action. I think it's really, really valuable to start from a positive place of success, because if you know what you want to do, but you don't know what that's going to do for you, well, how can you be sure it's even the right thing to work on? It's important to be able to see the impact of your success so that you know if what you're pursuing is going to get you the meaningful results you want. And I think the framework gets that captured really well.
It sounds to me, this framework, was centered on positivity. A lot of times you're looking maybe at you're looking at challenges, but it seems like this was more sort of opportunity focused. And again, let's try to find solutions. Is that accurate, Wynter? Or?
I think that it is very positive. The framework does come from a very positive place, but I think it comes from, more importantly, a place of balance. We have to acknowledge that along the path of trying to achieve our ambitions, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be barriers, and you have to address them. But we don't have to focus solely on the reasons why something could be a challenge or something might not work. We also have to focus on what could be the best possible outcome. What could happen if we're successful? And I think reframing things, it's a framework, so reframing things. So our focus is around, we're trying to achieve an ambition. We're achieving a goal, and we believe that this goal is going to make the world better. We're going to end up with a better outcome. Really helps us work more collaboratively because we all have this positive goal in mind. So the positivity is key, but we definitely don't neglect acknowledging that there are barriers, there are challenges that have to be addressed as a part of working through any problem.
But the vast majority of the time, those barriers and challenges are themselves opportunities. If you run into difficulty convincing someone that there's value in an idea, your biggest detractor will become your strongest advocate, because that's a chance to refine your plan and your approach. Every barrier we encounter, like the framework identifies, is a place there could be opportunity and there could be an accelerator. It's just important to know how to approach them and to approach them with that mindset, not looking at it as a way to stop you, but as a way to refine and to hone.
Something you mentioned, Dan, and something we talked about in our first episode when we were getting ready for the GFNI series that you did, were the challenges, the grand challenges. Can you quickly remind us what those are?
Yeah. So first is nuclear beyond electricity. Nuclear makes heat, not necessarily electricity. So what can we do with that? The second is no talent. I may have the order wrong. No talent, no sector. We need people to be able to make this work. People are the most valuable resource we have. And if we want to build hundreds of nuclear plants, thousands of nuclear plants, we're going to need to find a way to take advantage of the people we have and to train a workforce ready for the future. Then we had safe doesn't have to be slow. We in the nuclear industry have a fundamental obligation to the public to protect them from the potential dangers of our technology. But we want to realize the enormous potential benefit it has. And you can't let perfect be the enemy of extremely good. So finding a balance there is very important.
That's one of my favorite phrases, Dan, by the way. I use it all the time.
I think it's great. And then the fourth is operating a lean machine. The idea that because of the enormous workforce we need to be able to create, we're realistically not going to get there. The amount of people we need in so many disciplines, it's going to be really difficult. So how can we take better advantage of the people and the unique skills and capabilities they have through cross-training, through augmentation with technologies? How do we make the most out of the time that they have to spend on these projects? So those are the four grand challenges that we were addressing, that we did a hackathon on, that we thought through throughout the GFNI event.
So before we wrap up here, Bill, do you have any final questions for our guests?
No, I just was going to, again, thank you both for coming on today. Just again, what maybe it's just some final thoughts to leave with our audience about the experience of the podcast and about the meeting itself.
I think the thing that the conference left me with was just an incredible sense of the amount of talent and dedication across the nuclear industry, and people from all levels of experience, all different parts of the nuclear sector, who are absolutely dedicated to finding ways to innovate so that this industry continues to thrive, so that nuclear continues to be a part of the energy portfolio for the foreseeable future. And everyone there was so excited and so willing to dive in to something that for a lot of people in that room, there were exercises that will say took people out of their comfort zone. There were, you had to be willing to be a little bit silly. I had to be willing to sort of do things that, you weren't necessarily used to. And everybody was so willing to dive right in, to the point where when we got to the hackathon on the last day, literally every team that had a solution, that had worked hard, was so excited to present their solution to the audience and just talk about all the work they had done to try and solve these sort of grand challenges in the industry. So it was just a phenomenal experience. I was able to make connections with people, like Dan mentioned, from just all walks of life. And I cannot imagine a conference like this. And I just had a blast. It was incredible.
As for me, I think reflecting back on all of it, one thing really sticks out to me, and that's the maybe slightly subtle truth behind what the ambition wall tells us. If you want to turn your ambition into an action, but you haven't done it already, then the most important thing you can do is talk to someone. Because getting a perspective shift on something that has maybe stumped you for a little while, even if it's nothing else than a conversation with someone who hasn't heard about it before, but is willing to lend you an ear and happy to talk to you, getting a new perspective will transform the way you approach an opportunity. And that is the value to me that being able to host this special series was, that getting to participate in the GFNI was. It was the ability to shift my perspective in so many ways on so many topics. I'm still sort of piecing through a lot of what I've learned. But to anyone at home who wants to turn their ambition into an action, tell someone, because that's going to be the biggest, most valuable first step you can take in realizing whatever future you want to make.
That's great advice, Dan. And we'll leave our listeners with that as we wrap up today's episode. Thank you, Wynter and Dan, for joining Bill and I on this episode of the EPRI Current.
If you like today's show, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast. And feel free to share the podcast with your colleagues and friends. For more information about EPRI, please visit our website at www.epri.com. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at EPRI News. Together, we are shaping the future of energy.